Thank you, John. So I hope to give you a few insights today, keep it short, if not sweet, about the nature, scale, and volume of money laundering around the world today. So this session is about illicit finance, but illicit finance means lots of different things to lots of different people. It's a mixture of legal and illegal activity that we don't find palatable, but it's perfectly legal, to serious organised crime and terrorism. I'm going to focus particularly on money laundering. And I'll draw on my time here in the UK government, but also leading the global watchdog for money laundering and terrorist financing, the Financial Action Task Force. So first of all, 101, what is money laundering? And this might seem like a silly question to pose to you guys, but about 10 years ago, in the early days of, a bit longer, the early days of the Arab Spring, I was in government and I was asked to go and see the UK Chancellor at the time, George Osborne. I was tracking £100 million worth of local currency that Gaddafi was desperate to get his hands on. And I went to see the Chancellor, and he asked me what money laundering was, what the definition of money laundering was. And most of you being politicians know that I'm not going to get through a long legal definition before you get bored. So I oversimplified and I said, well, in the UK we take a rather broad approach. If you nick a Mars bar, a chocolate bar, and steal it, it's money laundering. And he paused and I thought maybe I've oversimplified. And he said, but what if you nick a Mars bar in Libya? And the conversation went downhill thereafter. And I can't reveal where we went from there, but we did manage to get the 100 million, or keep it out of the hands of Gaddafi, and we were able to use it for rebuilding Libya after that period. Essentially, most crime is committed for money, and to spend that money, criminals need to make it appear legit. And there are lots of different ways you can do that, but it's all money laundering. So when we're talking about money laundering, we're talking about fighting crime, following the money behind human trafficking and people trafficking and wildlife trafficking and arms trafficking. So it's a way of stopping crime. Don't think about it as a white-collar, victimless crime. Stopping money laundering really does save lives. How is it enabled? Well, John's already mentioned that we've essentially deputized the private sector, and that's because still today, the financial sector largely launders most of the money around the world. Increasingly, as we'll hear later from Lily, through cryptos as well. But not just the financial sector. Lawyers, accountants, casinos, estate agents, and companies, everyday companies, are used to hide the proceeds of crime. So we need transparency and we need regulation. So what is the scale of this problem? Well, in 1989, Time magazine, front cover of Time magazine, said money laundering, the billion-dollar shell game. Today, that was 1989, estimates for money laundered around the world on an annual basis range from 800 billion to 6 trillion. So this is not a problem that's going away or that we've dealt with particularly effectively. When you look at human trafficking alone, in the last 10 years, we've seen money made from that by criminals rise from 32 billion to 150 billion. And when you look at illegal wildlife trafficking, we're talking in the realm of 150 to 250 billion, but the total cost of environmental crime ranges from 1 to 2 trillion a year. So this is big money. The 'Ndrangheta, Italian mafia, 10 years ago, they turned over more money each year than the combined revenue of Deutsche Bank and McDonald's. 54 billion a year, one organised crime group. That money needs to be laundered, and there aren't that many people who do it, actually, professional money launderers. We're just not really focused on them. Jason Sharman, a friend of mine, professor at Cambridge, recently did a mystery shopper exercise, and he went around the world pretending to be various kinds of nefarious characters, from Russian oligarchs to your basic everyday criminal. And he tried to open companies being quite open about the fact that he was trying to hide some dodgy money in different jurisdictions around the world, dozens of different jurisdictions around the world. And his findings were a little bit surprising in that it was actually harder to open companies with little information in some of the Caribbean islands and places you might expect than it was in the US and the UK. In fact, when it comes to setting up a company, it seems the easiest place to do it, where you don't need any information at all, is Delaware. Jason set up a company in Delaware in 137 seconds with no information at all, being quite open about the fact that he was using it to hide the proceeds of crime. So money laundering is on our doorstep in the UK, in the US. We're the countries that benefit from it, but we're not the countries that suffer from it. How are we doing then? Well, also in 1989, at the same time Time magazine ran with that cover, the Financial Action Task Force was created by the then G8. Today, we have more than 200 jurisdictions committed to global standards to tackle money laundering, terrorist financing, and also the financing of weapons of mass destruction, the proliferation of those. Out of those 200 countries, only 5 of them are fully compliant with those global standards, despite the fact that every G7, G8, G20 communique for the last 20 years has committed to rapidly implementing those and called on the rest of the world to do so. And those 5 countries that are fully compliant with those global standards are, again, not the ones you might expect. We haven't got time to have a guessing competition. Uruguay, Malta, Macau, China. I forget the other 2. But these are not the usual countries. So we're not going about it particularly effectively. The costs of money laundering, though, for business range from anywhere between 300 billion a year to 1 trillion a year. So we're talking about a problem that might be in the region of 6 trillion a year, where it's costing business about 1 trillion a year, and out of that, we're recovering less than 1% of the proceeds of crime. So we've created a massive compliance industry, huge regulations, standards around the world, all kinds of activity, countries being listed, which is having a massive impact on their economies. The IMF estimate we're talking in the region of 10% of GDP, reduction in income for those countries that are listed for being bad at tackling money laundering. But again, we're not talking about US, UK that are being listed. So that, again, the rich countries are benefiting and the poor countries are suffering. How do we stop it? Well, we can't regulate our way out of it. We need investment, we need enforcement, and we need cultural change. In 1991, the first bank ever to be brought down for money laundering, Bank of Credit and Commerce International. If you've ever watched the film The Infiltrator, Bryan Cranston from Breaking Bad plays Bob Mazur, who was an undercover customs agent at the time. He spent 4 years laundering money for Pablo Escobar. During that course, he needed to find someone to launder the money. He went into Bank of Credit and Commerce International, I think it was in Panama, and he said, I need a safe place to put my money. It's coming from South America. I'll be honest with you, it's from the cartels. He had it all recorded in a big briefcase. You didn't have, silent or small listening devices those days. And they left the room, and he thought he was going to be arrested. They came back with the head of the bank, and they said, don't worry, we'll take good care of you. If you look at the deferred prosecution agreements around the world, largely led by the US since then, and you go through those in details, and I've spoken to Bob, he's done this, he still does this as a living. The kind of behavior we see by banks today is the behavior he was seeing at Bank of Credit and Commerce back in 1990. So you can have the best anti-money laundering systems in the world, but if the people running the bank are essentially bad, then it's not going to make any difference. We need real and consistent political support. Absent Panama Papers, embarrassing leaks, and wars in Ukraine, we don't have it. So it's great that you're here today. We've heard some passionate speeches, but my experience, including sitting around the table with G20 finance ministers and central bank governors, is that they know what to say, but it doesn't translate into action. While I was in government, and I was 7 years leading AML for the UK government, I was never once asked by a minister how to stop money laundering in the UK. But there was hell to pay when the minister was asked to go into his bank and show his passport and explain his source of wealth, source of funds. That's when I had to go to his office and explain what all these regulations were about. So there isn't real interest in tackling money laundering. The truth is, it's not consistent, and it only happens when you have wars in Ukraine or when governments have to respond to embarrassing situations. We need more transparency if we are to be open for business. And as I said, a lot of companies are used to hide the proceeds of money laundering around the world. But being open for business as a country means being open about who is doing business here. And that means we need to know who's ultimately behind companies and legal arrangements, trusts in the UK and elsewhere. And we're not doing very well at that so far. We need to know who's pulling the strings behind our economies. And that includes political donations. It's not just money going into banks. So we need more enforcement and not more regulation, but better regulation. And if we do this, we will take the profit out of crime, we'll cut off the fuel from terrorism and terrorist states, and we will protect our people, our planet, and our economies. Thank you.